Your sexuality is one of the most powerful things that's forming you, that's shaping who you're becoming. And so it's something that our culture will constantly try to use to deform you. Because God's design for your life, the one that he wants to sanctify you towards, is radically countercultural, and it always has been. It's God's will that you should be sanctified, that you should avoid sexual immorality, that each of you should learn to control your own body in a way that's holy and honorable, not in passionate lust like the pagans who do not know God, and that in this matter, no one should wrong or take advantage of a brother or sister. The Lord will punish all those who commit such sins, as we told you and warned you before. For God did not call us to be impure, but to live a holy life. Therefore, anyone who rejects this instruction does not reject a human being, but God, the very God who gives you his Holy Spirit. All right. Some of you right now are thinking, this was the wrong day to invite my mom to church. Like Paul jumps straight into the deep end of sanctification, but he's got a reason for that, and it's that your sexuality is one of the most powerful things that's forming you, that's shaping who you're becoming, and so it's something that our culture will constantly try to use to deform you. Because God's design for your life, the one that he wants to sanctify you towards, is radically countercultural, and it always has been. That's why Paul gets to the end of this section, and he's like, hey, this is God's thing, not my thing. These are not my preferences. These are his principles, and so if you have an issue with any of them, take it up with the Creator who created them. And he says that because the people in Thessalonica would have heard about God's sexual ethic and said, that's crazy. And people still do, in part because sexuality is so powerful that our enemy uses it in a massive way to try to prevent us from becoming who God says we're supposed to be. And if we look at our society and you look back over the course of human history, what you see is that sexuality often gets warped in one of two directions. It either gets deified or it gets degraded. And here's what's behind the curtain on that. Both identity and shame are some of the most powerful and foundational building blocks of your formation. And so if you can attach sex to either of those, if you can stick sex on identity or you can stick sex on shame, then you can shape people into something other than what God created them to become. And so on the one hand, we have this idea that sex is God, that it is the main point of life and the main part of your identity, that if you boil off everything else about you, that core thing on the very inside is your feelings and desires about sex, and you ought to pursue them with everything you've got, because in doing that, you'll be saved. And then you have the flip side, and this is where the church often gets off course, and that's that sex is bad, and it's gross, and it's dirty, and it's inappropriate, and so you shouldn't talk about it, and you shouldn't think about it. You should just save it as a gift for the person you love most. That's so weird. Can we stop throwing that on the next generation? Like, that's such an odd thing to say. You guys, God designed sex on purpose. That's why it works. It's not like Adam was like strolling along in the garden one day and he tripped over a vine onto Eve and they had a weird moment. Like, I don't know what just happened. And then she got fat and 9 months later Cain came. That's not what happened. And sex also isn't something God designed and then regretted. He didn't watch it happen and be like, what have I done? Like, the Bible tells us God delights in sex. It's why he put an erotic love poem smack dab in the middle of his book. Have you ever read that? It's intense. Like, that'll make anybody blush, the kind of stuff they say to each other. But God's delight in sex isn't contained just to Song of Songs. In 1 Thessalonians 4, what Paul tells us is that we're made to please God, and that our sexuality can not only please God, but it can sanctify us. And that may sound super weird, that sex can make you more like Jesus, but it shouldn't. It only sounds that way because our culture has moved so far from the picture of sex that God gives us. And so I want to talk about this. I want to talk about that this morning. And I want to start by using the same disclaimer that Paul did. These are not my ideas. This is God's stuff. And if you don't like them, that's a him thing. You can take it up with the Creator, because this is what the Creator has to say about this specific thing that he created. And I'm not going to add anything to that. And I'm also not going to pretend there's nuance, that there just isn't, that there wasn't for 2,000 years of church history, that 90+% of the global church today and 100% who hasn't lived in the modern West wouldn't pretend there is. I'm just going to summarize what the Bible says and what the historical global movement of Jesus' followers has always held. And before I do that, I want to say this is not condemnation. This is not me wagging a finger at anybody who's gone wrong in any area. This is not me layering on more shame that gives us more fear that God's going to zap us. It's not that. Every single one of us has sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Most of us, if not all of us in this room, have gotten it wrong in this arena. But I love you guys and I want the best for you. I want you to live lives that please God and sanctify you. And so every Sunday, I'm trying to open up the Word and say, what does God have to say? What can give us a bigger, better vision of who He is and who He created us to be so that we can live the most beautiful stories we possibly can? And this is what He says about sex. Sex is meant for one man and one woman who've made an unbreakable covenant with one another and with God to live in a lifelong marriage. That's the design, and those are the parameters. And what Paul's saying to these baby Christians in Thessalonica is you really only have two options when it comes to experiencing sex. There's abstaining from sex altogether, but when it comes to experiencing sex, there's marriage and there is immorality, and that's it. There's nothing more beyond. It's a binary choice, and if you step outside the boundaries that God set up, you're not only going to lose your joy, you're going to lose your revolutionary witness to a watching world. And I know we're Americans. We hear that and we think, okay, but that's a little outdated. Isn't it? Like we've evolved beyond that thinking. We've progressed to a point where we don't need the old rules and the old fences around sexuality anymore, right? And here's what I find interesting. Like what our society currently calls progressive absolutely is, if you know nothing about human history and you don't realize that we are regressing very quickly back to the Greco-Roman understanding of sex and sexuality, toward how their culture treated it, which has a massive Venn diagram overlap, by the way, with many of the oppressive patriarchal major religions around the world right now, and with most of the pagan animists who have lived for the last few thousand years. And all of those belief systems, every last one of them, ends in a place where women get treated as property and not people. But, you know, if that doesn't sound so bad to you, if you're like, I've always thought that women should be treated like that, good news. We are really quickly progressing our way back there. And it's easy sometimes to look at that and be like, wow, that's not good. Our culture's gone off the rails sexually. Like, look around, this has to be the worst things have ever been. And it's not. Like, even to this Thessalonian culture to which Paul was writing, most of the men there had 3 women in their lives that they were regularly sexually active with. The philosopher Demosthenes explained it like this. He said, well, mistresses we keep for the sake of pleasure, and concubines for attending to the daily needs of our bodies, but wives can bear us legitimate children and be faithful guardians of our households. And so all these dudes in the society which Paul was writing had like 3 main women in their lives, in addition to prostitutes who they visited whenever they felt like it. But they had a hetaira, which is someone who stimulated them intellectually and sexually but wasn't marriage material, either because she was like too young or she wasn't the right social class. And then they had a palakis, which was a sex servant or a sex slave, basically. And then they had a gune, a wife, to bear them legitimate heirs so they could pass down their stuff and their name. And so our society's understanding of sex is not particularly unusual. It's just immoral. And much like debased sexuality eventually rotted out the core and ultimately destroyed the societies that have gone before us, it's going to do the same thing here. It always does. That's like the common thread. It's a common denominator in the fall of every hegemonic power for the last 5,000 years. So that's where we're headed. It's going to happen, but we as the people of God are meant for more. We were created to live countercultural lives, which is why Paul wrote to the church, no more of this. No more 3 women plus prostitutes. We're not doing that anymore. No more sexual immorality. What's fascinating is that when he talks about sexual immorality, he implies at the same time that there is sexual morality. And he connects that both to pleasing God and to sanctification in our lives as a way of saying that the fruit of those two different paths, morality and immorality, eventually leads us to wildly different places, even if it's not immediately obvious, even if we can't see it right away. And I get that it's easy for us to look at the world today and say, are they really that different? Okay, Mike, I get it that that's what this old book says, but does it really make that much of an impact on where my life ends up? And Paul says that it does, because he draws this distinction between lust ending up in a spot where you take advantage of other people and holiness ending up in a spot where you honor other people.